Welcome to Preaching Innovation Lab, a project of the Kerygma Initiative here at Palmer Theological Seminary. This is a monthly series of short interviews with authors of recent books on preaching, books that we believe can inspire preachers to think afresh about the theory and the practice of preaching. I'm David Stark, director of the Kerygma Initiative and instructor of Homiletics at Palmer Seminary. Today, we are excited to meet with Dr. Trey Clark. Dr. Clark is assistant professor of preaching and spiritual formation at Fuller Theological Seminary. He is also an ordained pastor with over 20 years of ministry experience. Dr. Clark serves on the editorial board of Homiletic and Spiritus, and he is the author of works such as Protest and as Preaching, the Pneumatic Proclamation of Black Lives Matter, which you can find on the International Journal of Homiletics, and Learning from Her Story of Preaching in the Global South, Reflections on the Preaching Lives of Rebecca Proughton and Dora Yu, which you can find in Liturgy. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Clark.
Thanks so much for the chance to be with you, Dr. Stark.
It is good to see you today, Dr. Clark. Today, we are discussing your most recent book, Black Contemplative Preaching, A Hidden History of Prayer, Proclamation, and Prophetic Witness. Here's the book. It was a delight to read. Thank you so much for your research and your writing and your work. Let's jump in. Can you tell us, I've read the book, so I have a sense, but tell everyone else who hasn't maybe had a chance to read it, what is Black contemplative preaching? How do you differentiate it from other modes? How do you think about Black contemplative preaching?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. Maybe let me start with defining contemplative preaching. I understand contemplative preaching as a form of Christian proclamation that weds prayer, wisdom, and reflection to invite listeners into a transformative encounter with God. So in many ways, Black contemplative preaching resonates with those different dimensions of contemplative preaching more broadly, but it's shaped by its Africana heritage. And so it has this way of being shaped by holistic spirituality, communal orientations, and then vibrant orality. And it has a telos that is often more distinctive than contemplative preaching more broadly. And that telos is the flourishing or the liberation of Black folks in all creation. I, in the book, talk about three technical distinctives of Black contemplative preaching: habitus of prayer, a mystical hermeneutic, and a meditative homiletical style. Those appear in many forms of contemplative preaching, but in Black contemplative preaching, again, they are reformed and reshaped by this more communal orientation, this holistic spirituality, and the vibrant orality that's often been part of Africana traditions.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing and so rich. I really enjoyed your examples, actually. After you sort of laid it out for us, you gave us so many wonderful examples, both the three main chapters that you mentioned, but several others. And that really leads me to my second question for you. Can you describe a little bit? I mean, you can't go through the whole book, of course, but can you describe a little bit? What does it look like to practice Black contemplative preaching? And maybe, if it's helpful, what is it not?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, there are many different manifestations of contemplative preaching and Black contemplative preaching, depending on the personality of the preacher, the context in which they're engaged in, their own formation and background. But let me highlight Howard Thurman and some of the practices that he incorporated and what I describe as his practice of contemplative preaching. As many would know, Thurman was an African-American mystic, pastor, theologian, civil rights activist. And I'll highlight a practice that is both before his sermons, in his sermons, and then after his sermons. So three different practices in these contexts. So one of the practices that was important for Thurman before preaching is what we might just call scriptural immersion. Thurman was known for immersing himself in poetry and philosophy and the arts, but he also held a unique place for scripture. And so he often meditated, memorized scripture, really just soaked his life into the scriptural story. And it was from this place that his preaching emerged. Contemplative preachers sometimes preach with notes, sometimes extemporaneously like Thurman. And for him, it was really important to have the sermon in him so that he could preach from that overflow. There's this place where he talks about how a preacher can be eloquent or brilliant and articulate, but ultimately a preacher must have experience with the word themselves in their life. There's no substitute, he says, for a preacher's experience with the word that they seek to proclaim. Now, a second practice that you can see in Thurman that shows up in the sermon itself is a practice of silence. For Thurman, silence wasn't empty, but it was actually substantive. At one place, he argues that God speaks loudest in silence. And so in the sermon itself, Thurman was known for having what we might call sermon pauses, or to echo the homiletician Evans Crawford, he shared silence with his listeners. For Thurman, the Spirit could speak as much in the silence as the Spirit could speak through the words. And then the last maybe practice of contemplative preaching from Thurman we could highlight is something that would be after the sermon. And this is, you might call it Sabbath rituals, or I like to think of it as rituals of replenishment. Often preaching can be draining and grueling on the physical body, the emotional and spiritual state of a preacher. And so what rituals do we have to replenish ourselves? Thurman believed that each person must find what he called the rhythmic pattern that will renew their souls, renew their spirits. And I think this is important practice is often emphasized among contemplative preachers is how do we cultivate rhythms that help us to live and lead sustainably in the ministry that the Spirit has invited us into.
Yeah. Thurman is such a great example. And in some ways, maybe you might even say more about him here in response to my next question. Reading your book, I was really struck with what a resource it is for this moment in ministry, with all of its challenges and hardships. And, I guess I just want to sort of toss up a softball to you, because I see so many responses to this question already in this book. But I'd love for you to talk about, for those who are watching this video, what do you think Black contemplative preaching could offer preachers facing the challenges of preaching and leading communities in this moment?
Yeah, there are many things that come to mind. I mean, one thing is, I would say, in the midst of the fragmentation of our times, Black contemplative preachers offer a holistic way of seeing and being in community with God, creation, and one another. Thurman was often known for speaking about the search for common ground, and this was something that informed his preaching. Like, how does preaching both emerge from community and seek to foster community and deep belonging, even in the midst of the fractures that shape our life together? How can we see the ways in which ultimately we are caught in this network of mutuality, to echo the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? And then maybe a second way in which they speak to us is in the midst of great fatigue and great fatigue, not only of the body, but of the soul, right? There is a kind of, some people talk about political exhaustion from the varied levels of threat and violence near and far that we experience in our world. How do we keep moving forward? Well, I think often Black contemplative preachers, again, invite us to attend to those routines, those relationships, those rhythms that replenish us and help us to live and lead faithfully in the midst of the demands and the challenges before us.
Dr. Trey Clark, thank you so much for offering your time and your wisdom today. I really enjoyed talking with you. And viewers, if like me, you wish we had more time with Dr. Trey Clark, let me encourage you to pick up a copy of his book, Black Contemplative Preaching, A Hidden History of Prayer, Proclamation, and Prophetic Witness. Thank you again, Dr. Clark.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to be with you.
And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Preaching Innovation Lab. We hope today's conversation sparked new ideas and fresh energy for your preaching ministry. Until next time, grace and peace.